If you've been with me with the other videos in this mini-series here already, you already know it. Animations are important. They support your user when using your website. He knows when he changed something, when he clicked somewhere. He gets a direct feedback. So animations are important and more than just a little extra. We already had a look at the normal CSS transitions and CSS animations. We also had a look at the ReactCSS transition group element which we can add to our application to use this object to animate the adding or deleting of elements. I'll stick to that, but in the last video we used the CSS transition property to do that. So we transitioned the opacity. Here I want to use a real animation instead. So I chose to use this flip animation, and I will also show you how to use a slide animation to animate an element in or out. So let's start. The setup here is the same as before. I have the same list with the same array of items. So you might watch the last video if you want to learn more about the setup. Just a brief recap. I do have an array of items which I display in this collection down here. And I already added the ReactCSS transition group, which has to be installed with npm install react add-on CSS transition group. You can see I imported here at the top. When I click the add button, I execute this method, which adds a new item to my array here. And when I click the delete button, well, it deletes an element with this method. I do all the adding and deleting in a way that I can be sure that the state gets updated. So by creating a new object instead of pushing or popping elements of my array. So I already used the ReactCSS transition group and I explained the general usage in the last video. We set up a transition name and then we create some CSS classes which get attached by the ReactCSS transition group element here to the element nested between its opening and closing tag, so the li element in this case, whilst animating it in or out. Thereafter, these classes will be destroyed or will be removed. They're only available once the element is added or deleted. And we specify the name of our classes here with the transition name property. We also set up how long the initial transition, so when we fade something in, should take, and how long it should take to fade something out with the transition enter timeout and leave timeout properties here. So that is the basic usage. And I want to start with sliding in some elements or sliding them out. So as you saw in the last video, by setting it up like this, I now have to provide some CSS classes which this ReactCSS transition group will apply or will append to my nested element, the li element in this case, which is this individual list item, of course. Since I named it slide, it will append a slide enter CSS class to this element right at the beginning of this animate in time frame. So when we add a new item, this will be added first. So here I want to set up the initial state. Now since I want to slide it in, I will set this to transform and then translate x minus 100% so that it's just pushed out of the width of this element the text sits in. So this allows me to slide it in. So initially it will not be visible. Then I add slide enter active. This class will also be added during the add an item time frame here, these 300 milliseconds I set up, but a fraction of a second or millisecond after slide enter. So this will be set after we set this initial state up here. So here, previously, I set up the final state and the transition element or transition attribute. Now here I want to use an animation instead. So I will add animation here and I will name the animation slide in. Of course, this name is up to you. It should take 300 milliseconds since this is the time frame I set up here in my ReactCSS transition group. And I will ease it out. Of course, the easing function is up to you. Very important, set up forwards so that the final state of the animation is kept. You don't want it to pop back to the initial state. You want to keep that final state. So that's slide enter. Let's also set up slide leave before then creating the keyframes for this animation. So slide leaf, of course, should start at 0% and should be called slide leaf. Here we should have slide leaf active, and we want to animate the slide out animation here. So now we need to create two different sets of keyframes for slide in and for slide out. So let's do this next. I'll add the keyframes right below keyframes for slide in, and thereafter I'll add slide out. So slide in, here I'll use from and to, but you could also use 0% and 100%, and you could even build more complex keyframes, of course. So here I will start transform at translate x minus 100%. This, of course, should match the initial state you set up in slide enter. And it should navigate to, or animate to, transform translate x 0% to move it on this x-axis. Now this should animate it in. Now to animate it out, here I will add slide out. And of course here I want to start at 0%. Again, this should match your initial state up here. And the goal is I want to move it all the way to the right. So sliding in will start at the left, move it in the center, and sliding out should start in the center, move it out. With this should work. So let's see this. If I reload this application and now click an item, it slides in. And if I delete the item, it slides out. Wonderful. So this is a really easy and quick way to add beautiful animations and make your lists more reactive than just simply pushing an element to the end of it and then it's there. This is much more beautiful and actually shows the user, hey, I did something. Great. Now let's enhance this or alternate this by also adding a flip animation so that we flip it in instead of slide it in. I will, for this, copy all that code, all the classes and keyframes. And now the goal is to rename them first. So all slide text here should be renamed to flip. In WebStorm, I can do this by marking it and then hitting Ctrl-G a couple of times. You might have a similar feature in your editor or IDE. So now I get a couple of flip enter, flip leaf classes here and flip in and flip out keyframes. But of course here I don't want to translate X, instead I want to rotate Y. Rotate Y, just to bring this back in mind, is this. Rotate around the Y axis. This would be rotate X, rotate around the X axis. So rotate Y, but we of course don't want to start at minus 100%. We need to specify some degrees here. And since I want to rotate in, I want to start at 180 degrees. Not 0 degrees, because that will be the final state. It shouldn't be rotated in the final state after all, right? So the initial state should be something else, 180 degrees. Now for the leaf state here, I will set rotate Y to 0 degrees, because it should start at the final state of the flip enter animation, which is 0 degrees. It's not rotated. And this is definitely the state we want to have when animating. Now I will just copy this, and in our keyframes, the initial state of the flip in animation should of course be the same as up here in the flip enter class, but the final state should be 0 degrees. Now I can copy that and set this as the initial state for the flip out animation, which of course should be the final state of the flip in animation. And then I will set this to, let's say, 90 degrees here. Now in order to see this in action, I will switch this here, and this should no longer be slide, but now it should be flip to use our new animation. And if I now reload this and add an item, it flips in, and if I delete it, it gets removed. Notice the difference between 180 and 90 degrees. For flipping it in, I start at 180 degrees, which is why we see a full turn. When I flip it out, I only flip up to 90 degrees, which is why it is removed right at the point when it is, well, almost invisible. So right now. You see that? Of course, you can change this and fine-tune this to your needs. So this was the very basic introduction to ReactJS and CSS animations and how to animate the addition and deletion of elements. If you like this, of course, I'm happy to dive deeper into that, show some advanced animations, show some other things you can do, how you can use JavaScript to animate, and much more. Let me know your opinion. See you in the other videos. Bye.